So Games Workshop's given us an entire roadmap for the 40k Codex releases for the next year, including a sweet hint of a mystery redacted Codex. Let's talk through the chart army by army and talk about what's coming next for these releases. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where last night we talked about the big model reveals that Games Workshop had coming out of their Warhammer World Championships. Quite a good one for 40k on the whole, I think. Both the main reveals and the peripheral game systems all were kind of interesting for the grim darkness of the far future. With so many shiny new models on offer though, I feel like perhaps the new Codex roadmap maybe didn't get as much massive attention at the time, and I thought it was worth having another video to talk through the updates and some pretty heavy hints and clarifications for what's coming over the next year for 40k. In brief, the main chart they showed off was the known codexes of Adeptus Mechanicus and Necrons for Winter 23, the 5 ones that we knew about from Spring 24, though there are some definitely big details clarified about the Dark Angels they did just slip in there alongside the model releases. And then now a look at the codexes that are going to be coming out in summer 2024, Codex Genestealer Cults Adeptus Sororitas, and perhaps most mysteriously of all, a Redacted Codex that both has the potential just to be one that they've completely not announced yet and is just another run-of-the-mill one, or at least more or less. Though given that it's the only one that they've basically told us about but not actually shown us, there's a good chance that this could be something exciting. Let's go through the timeline in order and all the hints they've dropped for them so far. First up, perhaps one of the biggest questions that everyone has on their mind when a new codex comes out is, will my faction get new models, and how many of those new models will they get? In previous previews, they did say that literally every single one of the first 7 codexes after Space Marines and Tyranids would get at least some new models. We already know that the Admech and the Necrons have got theirs with their new character miniatures. We know that the Dark Angels have got some and have more on the way. But that does imply at least some sort of releases for Tau Custodes, Orcs, and the Chaos Space Marines as well. In this preview, they only had a very little aside as to talking about models for the new dexes, but didn't seem quite as certain to absolutely commit to every single faction getting a new miniature. I believe that the language they used was that most of the codexes will come up with at least some new models, and some of them will come with a lot of new models. I feel like to some extent that might have just been the chap running the stream not wanting to overpromise on a detail that he wasn't 100% certain of for literally every single army. And in all honesty, I'd be kind of surprised if each one of these factions didn't at least get some kind of release going alongside their book. Games Workshop really does seem to have fallen into a pattern over the last few editions now. It looks like each faction can now expect their codex once per edition, and not going to be doubling up on a codex within an edition unless they pull a surprise release of Codex Space Marines late on. And they do seem to have a system where they basically deliberately hold back one miniature for each codex to make sure that at least something exciting and new is coming out. A lot of the time they achieve this with character miniatures, either reinterpreting more unique characters from the lore, like say the Tyranids 9th edition codex with the Parasite of Mortrex, or Drukhari with Lilith Hesperax, so that even if the faction isn't lucky enough to actually get a full model release at the codex, which some of them do, at least there's something interesting and new to pick up, which could be an interesting thing for some collectors of the army. There's a good chance that with each of these they might well redo the combat patrol boxes for each faction as well. They have done that for every single one of the armies so far, and I might talk about that in another video. Though so far it doesn't really look like it's particularly good news on that front, as basically all 4 of the new combat patrols look like they're pretty much flat worse to the old versions of them. Not necessarily with worse models or anything, but just less models for the money that you're likely to pay. That's probably a discussion topic for another time though. Going through their timeline though, and we know most about the next 2 codexes, Codex Adeptus Mechanicus and Codex Necrons are the next. These are billed for Winter 2023, which is almost a bit of a conflict in terms. Games Workshop tend to be a little bit loose on their definitions of strict seasons and tend to have the policy of saying that things are coming a little bit later than they might be. And they seem to go by the more American definition of seasons, with winter starting in December as opposed to midway through. Winter 2023 though really does imply that both the Admech and the Necrons will at least probably have their codexes out this side of Christmas, though we'll have to wait and see on that front. It could just be winter and the 2023 might be a misnomer. All that aside though, one of the previous hints kind of implied that it might be Admech next as opposed to Necrons, unless they pull a double release weekend on us. One of their articles when they announced the Necron Codex billed it as the 4th Codex of 10th edition, which would imply after Admech, seeing as we'd had 2 so far. For the Adeptus Mechanicus Codex, it looks like the only new unit that they're getting is this Sidonian Skatros. They're kind of ridiculous, but also kind of awesome in my opinion, Stilt Sniper. Pretty much a nice bit of Admech body horror in making a human into a watchtower, and one that can just sit in the same place for days on end, spot the enemy for the rest of the formation, and maybe provide a little bit of surprise sniper support as they do. Looks like it's interesting enough in game as well, with Lone Operative. Having cheap one of those is generally pretty helpful. Otherwise, they've just got their new combat patrol coming, featuring the Cerberus Squad, Manipulus, and the Taraxi. I think some pretty nice models in there, but also perhaps some of the most expensive in Warhammer 40k points per the price, and I don't feel it's going to be a very feel-good combat patrol in terms of discount if it's priced at the same as the rest. Otherwise, they gave us a hint about the Codex as well with the detachment names. The Rad cohort gets some updated rules for the sort of underwhelming bombardment that they have right now. And otherwise, it looks like there's some specific formations tailoring themselves to bits of the army. A Skitarii Hunter cohort for sort of stealth Skitarii that feels kind of Styges themed. A Data Psalm Conclave, which sounds like it's mainly focused on Tech Priests and the Court Mechanicus, and a cohort Cybernetica, which has a focus on Castellan robots. There's also an Explorator Maniple. Maybe that could be something that transports all vehicles, perhaps. Hopefully it'll make the army a bit more interesting in any case. I feel like they tend to be a bit limited at the moment, often relying on things like Cataphoron Servitors to be good and have some strength in game. Otherwise, supposedly next, if the Admech one does indeed come first, will be the Necrons, a massively popular faction right now given their huge launch in 9th edition, and they're getting Orican the Diviner, Imitek the Stormlord, and the Overlord with the Translocation Shroud as their new miniatures. They also have the new combat patrol featuring the Doomstalker plus Scorpec Destroyers. From the Codex, it looks like they'll lose at least 3 datasheets compared with what they are at the moment. That seems possible to be things like the Locust Lord, maybe the regular Lord on foot, or some of their Finecast characters potentially. Will be a bit sad to see which options of those go, as they all feel kind of nice. And again, we've got some interesting detachment names previewed and rough themes for the army. The Canoptek Court is Cryptek and Canoptek themed. The Hypercrypt Legion is a teleport one with Grey Knight style teleport shenanigans going on. The Annihilation Legion is Destroyers and Flayed Ones focused. The Obeisance Phalanx is maybe the most mysterious of them. Might be another general purpose character focused one perhaps. Then after the Necrons, that puts us into the Spring Codexes. Again, given Games Workshop's definition of seasons, I'd expect these after the 1st of March, though honestly, if they're teasing Dark Angels quite this early, it could be possible they come a little bit earlier than that. I really wouldn't be too surprised to see them in February, but again, I suppose we'll wait and see. It seems likely, both with their position on the top left of the graphic, that Dark Angels could be the first out of these, plus the fact that we've already seen some of the previews for their miniatures. And then beyond that, we have the Orcs, Adeptus Custodes, Tau, and Chaos Space Marines. For the Dark Angels, the preview definitely gave us a few more good ideas as to what to expect. In the last graphic they had, they branded them as Codex Dark Angels, but in this one they've more clearly labelled them as Codex Supplement Dark Angels, so it looks like the Divergent chapters are keeping with the same system that they had in 9th edition, where they still use the core Codex Space Marines and then add their additional datasheets with their own codex. That is kind of to be expected really, given that that's how the indexes work at the moment. And it does usually mean that the actual book for Dark Angels tends to be significantly less expensive than the rest of the codexes, maybe Games Workshop giving a nod that it's kind of unreasonable and a bit painful to have people have to pick up 2 very expensive codex books just to play one faction. The codex supplements tend to be around about the half the cost of the regular codexes, or a little bit more. In any case, as per last night's previews, which I talked about earlier on the channel, the models they showed off for them were Asmodai and the Deathwing Knights. The Deathwing Knights have become their own unique kit that's separate from the regular Deathwing Terminator and Command Squad kit, so it seems very likely that those ones are going to be redone as well. And Asmodai was pretty awesome at regaining a great big power sword that he had previously. Again, given that they've already had models shown off and none of the rest of the spring ones have so far, it does kind of imply that they're probably going to be one of the first ones out of that bunch. Otherwise, I just can't help but think that we might have seen, say, the Adeptus Custodes miniature if they were the codex that were coming first out of them. Finally, and perhaps most excitingly for the things that Games Workshop teased, they basically did confirm that Dark Angels are indeed getting a big proper release wave, something that people were suspecting quite a bit, but they hadn't actually officially said yet. On stream, they said that these rather nice new kits with the Deathwing Knights and Asmodai were just the start of the Dark Angels releases, implying that the vast bulk of them is still to come. As expected, in my mind, that basically confirms that they are really getting a Black Templar style redo in all their glory. And it's pretty easy to imagine the other kits they're going to get alongside that: a standard Deathwing Terminator and Command Squad one, probably a new Raven Wing bike kit with the Black Knight plasma talons but upgraded to Space Marine Outrider scale. Remakes of some of the other characters, Ezekiel seems like a particularly good choice seeing as he's still got a metal miniature, though Samael and Belial would be top candidates as well. And hopefully something with some robed veteran Primaris, something that the Dark Angels have been lacking for a bit too long, I think. Given that this does look like it's going to be a full range refresh, it's very likely that they come with their own launch box the same way that Guard or Leagues of Votann got, or indeed the Black Templars got when they got their range refresh. I feel like it's very likely that the Dark Angels get those redone, and probably a new combat patrol with some unique minis like the Black Templars have. Seems like a pretty exciting time to be following the Unforgiven, particularly with Lionel Johnson back in the world as well. Otherwise, for spring codexes, we've only got one thing solidly confirmed so far, but there's plenty of easy directions they could go with the rest of them, with the miniatures that they'd confirmed for those. As I mentioned in other videos, Custodians really have loads of room to expand. They're basically half an army at the moment, with just the elite infantry section, and there's lots of tanks and vehicles and dreadnoughts and things that they should probably do in plastic at some point. I think they could just literally port the Forge World models to plastic and people would be very happy. Though if they just released near resculpts of them with slightly different names and things, I'm sure people would still be very enthusiastic. It would be absolutely epic to get something like a plastic Telemon or Caladius tanks, for example. For the Orcs, they got major releases last time. Maybe more obvious choices might be something like Tank Busters getting resculpted. They really stick out like a sore thumb within the rest of the Orc range now as the most inadequate kit for the job. If they got something similar to the love that the Commandos got, it would be pretty awesome. Otherwise for them, it's probably things like their unique characters that could really do with saving from Legends and putting into plastic. Characters like Captain Badrock, Mad Doc Grotznik, or Boss Sagstruck would all very much like a resculpt, please. For the Chaos Space Marines, plenty of other directions they could go. The Chaos Bikers seem like the most in dire need for new updates. These seem likely given that they were mentioned last time round in the rumours for the previous Chaos decks but then never materialised. And for the Tau Empire, it looks like it could be auxiliaries. We know that there's a Crutox coming from one of Games Workshop's rumour engines, so that's the only one that we really have confirmed right now. Otherwise, maybe top priorities would be redoing the Vespid, maybe some standard troop battle line troops, and perhaps new sculpts for their ethereals wouldn't hurt. Looks like spring's going to be a pretty busy time for Codex releases in any case, and it does feel like this is going to be an exciting time for lots of collectors out there. Particularly Orcs, Custodians, Tau and Chaos Space Marines represent an enormous chunk of 40k collectors out there. They're all really popular factions and stand out so amongst the rest, particularly when you add Necrons, Space Marines and Tyrannies to that list. That's basically all of the top factions in terms of collectors in Warhammer 40k. Maybe the only really popular faction that's missing from that list are the Astra Militarum, though it does look at this stage they're probably coming in the second half of the Codex releases. That brings us on to the new confirmed Summer 24 Codexes. I guess summer by Games Workshop's usual reckonings would be from June onwards, so we are looking quite a way into the future now. They've reported that these two will be Codex Genestealer Cults and Codex Adeptus Auroritus, so good news for the worshippers of the Emperor and the worshippers of the Four-Armed Emperor as well. Genestealer Cults are definitely one of Games Workshop's more niche factions out there. They're really quite a cool army with their mutant mining insurgency, and I feel like their respawny type rules have made them really quite fun in 10th edition, particularly now they're actually a bit more balanced points-wise. Their last release in 9th edition was just the Reductus Saboteur. They didn't go too crazy with new models with them then, and it certainly feels like they could have the opportunity to gain a few more kits. They already feel like they're at a point where their character line is kind of oversaturated already. I feel like another random character release just might not be the most interesting. I think weirdly one of my biggest wishes for the Genestealer Cult Codex is for them not to ruin the absolutely excellent Combat Patrol box that they've got. I feel like if that one gets a remake and it goes something similar to the ones they've been releasing at the moment, it will be a massive decline in value. The one that they've got at the moment does have the majority of the range in it, and it makes collecting a very expensive faction just a little bit more bearable. Otherwise, for the Sisters of Battle, I'd say they're maybe a little bit less niche than Genestealer Cult in terms of player rate. Quite a long way behind some of the big factions of 40k though. They definitely don't have as much of a following as say Orcs, Space Marines, Necrons or Tau. Games Workshop has been pretty generous with the releases that they've had, seeing as they're basically a new range entirely over the past 5 years, coming out towards the end of 8th edition. The last releases we got for them in early 9th were Morven Val, the Paragon Warsuits, the Castigator Tank and a few others. They're already quite a solid, well-rounded army, I think. And maybe one of the most obvious ways for them to go with these would be to redo some things like the Death Cult Assassins or Crusaders, kind of obvious within their range as miniatures that need an update really. I feel like their codex could be interesting to add a few more flavours to them as well. Maybe a nice melee detachment to help out their somewhat struggling combat troops at the moment. Things like the Repentia, the Zephyrim and things just aren't quite as vicious enough to get them played a lot as they were when they had access to Bloody Rose things in the past. Finally, and perhaps the most intriguing thing of all, is the mystery Redacted Codex that's going to be coming in summer 2024. It's listed below GSC and Sisters, and unlike times in the past where they have said that there's a Redacted Codex, they haven't even given us any sort of hint as to whether or not it's a Chaos Imperium or Xenos. They kind of skimmed over this one in the preview stream. The only hint that they gave us was that it's super secret, though I'd say that that still doesn't necessarily mean anything. It could just literally be the next codex they have in their release schedule, and one of the many others that we know are coming in 10th edition. But I'd say that given no hint as to whether it comes from Imperial Chaos or Xenos, and also the on-stream comment does maybe just imply that it has got a slightly higher chance than usual of being something weird or even a new faction altogether. If it does wind up being an entirely new faction for Warhammer 40k, it does look like it will be odds-on to be Chaos. Which new faction should be added to the game often comes up in conversation and on discussion around army releases, and there are a few names that just come up as suggestions as clearly popular things that people want to see time and time again. By far the most obvious one that they could do would be Emperor's Children. They're really conspicuous as a faction that is definitely going to happen at some point, and it's certainly a question of when it happens, not if. We pretty much know the drill for this one now, as with Thousand Sons, Death Guard and World Eaters, they'll get their Primarch in new Snaky Fulgrim, new plastic Noise Marines, probably a new Lucius the Eternal, and maybe a few other things like Sonic Dreadnoughts or something, and likely some freaky drugged up cultists. If this was indeed a new faction, I'd say that that's the most likely, but there's definitely other possibilities. I think Dark Mechanicum is something that definitely could be on the cards this edition, given that they released Vashtor last time round, and he's doing big plot things in Warhammer 40k. Reawakening some infernal chaos machines of some sort or another could be pretty interesting with his webway tunneling device, and it'd be pretty awesome to see some disturbing heretical machines realised for 40k. Otherwise, maybe a big possibility for a Chaos faction could also be some form of the return of the Lost and the Damned, something to represent the mortal followers of Chaos, which really are a presence in the lore. I feel like quite a lot of generic conflicts are playing traitor guardsmen or renegades and mutants that are trying to overthrow Imperial society. For basically an army and forces that crop up so often in 40k stories, it has always felt a bit weird that they're just not represented in game to any great extent. They definitely could be another fun possibility. They already do have plenty of units that are available for them. They've released kill teams for Beastmen and Traitor Guard, which would fit in very nicely, and they could even maybe use things like Chaos Cultists and Accursed Cultists to give them another way of being fielded. Probably going down the rabbit hole a bit too much on those though. There's a very good chance that it's just one of the mainstream codexes just not being released yet, and it's one of the later summer releases, so Games Workshop aren't letting us see that far ahead. Even if it is one of those, it could still represent a big release. We basically know that Votan and World Eaters are going to be getting a big release of some sort in this edition at some stage. They both felt like Games Workshop released about half an army for them last edition. And I guess for other weird or unusual ones, we might see something like Agents of the Imperium come out as an actual codex book, representing all the Imperial agents out there, and could be an opportunity to further flesh out the Inquisition just a bit more. All very intriguing though, perhaps a fairly smart bit of marketing in any case from Games Workshop. Always nice to have a good mystery to talk about possibilities for. So anyway, there's a rough overview of Games Workshop's big codex roadmap. Let me know what you think down in the comments below, or if there's any other bits that I might have missed for details or teasers that we've had so far. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, or I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to help support and keep these videos coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.